During my research, I realized that age 7, 8 was a pretty significant moment for you. And one of it was because you got your first computer from your dad and
Yeah.
you took it apart. That was the first thing that you did. So,
Yeah.
what was the experience like? Why would you do that?
I guess I was just a typical boy, just try to break things. And I'm always very curious about how things work. So yeah, the first thing I wanted to do is just understand, okay, it's like a big box, but there's must be more happening inside that box. I want to see it. So I started taking it apart. And the funny thing was for the next few years, I actually kind of built my own computers just because I kind of like to configure it my own way, design it my own way. So that taking it apart actually led to me putting computers together and even working at a computer store for a few years as well.
And your dad must have influenced you as well, right? I heard that he was in software as well. So he must have
Yes.
encouraged you. But
Yeah.
he probably was appalled that you took apart your first computer.
That was it. Yeah. Because we always had computers around the house. We always kind of talked about computers and even kind of making programs and developing. So yeah, it was a big influence for me.
Incredible. And you also started doing martial arts at the time. What was that like? Because you end up being on the national team for karate.
Yeah, it's been such a big influence in my life. And I always wanted to be a famous soccer player. And true story. So I wanted to join a club in the Netherlands. And my mom, she couldn't find the actual club for training. So I missed the first training because I couldn't find the club and the field. So I said, well, this is stupid. I'll do something else. One of my friends started judo and he said, Mike, just come along. You might like it. And then through judo, I got into more martial arts and ended up doing karate for a very, very long time.
Wasn't it also as a form of self-protection? Because your dad was saying that, oh, you were getting beaten up a lot at school.
It wasn't so much self protection, it was a lot about building confidence, feeling good about yourself, learning about your body, understanding your own strength. So it was a lot about building confidence. And then it helped that I was able to defend myself as well. But yeah.
So you end up going to university, you studied computer science and business admin. And I heard this funny story. Age 19, you found out that university wasn't hard and you went to the dean to ask to be allowed to skip a grade.
Yeah, it's funny. So I had to choose because at the end of my career in karate, I basically had to decide to either graduate or do karate professionally. So we were selected for the World Championships in Cape Town, South Africa. And my dad said, nope, you're going to finish university. You're never going to get like a proper job doing karate, like get a degree at least, and then you can make your own choices. So I decided to not go to the World Champs and sort of finish university. But then I was so upset because the first 2 years, it felt relatively easy. So me and I had a good friend, Richard, and a few others. So we went to the dean and said, is there a way that we can speed this up? And I think they must have thought we were crazy. And he was like, that doesn't make any sense. He said, but what we can do is if you do these sort of advanced assignments and if you guys all ace it, well, then we can shorten the second year of university, which basically made us skip a class. So we all aced it wasn't too hard. We all aced the assignments. And yeah, we accelerated our second year. I was just turning 20 and I finished university relatively early.
So you finished university early. How do you end up in an insurance company as your first job?
Oh, yeah, because the funny thing was we always had to kind of make your thesis on a certain topic. And I wanted to do it about IT auditing, like the most boring topic ever. But it had some really intricate sides to it. But then you had to find a company that wants to endorse your research. And through a mutual friend, I got in contact with ING. And ING had a big subsidiary, which is an insurance company in the Netherlands. So they effectively sponsored my thesis and my research. And they said, this is really good. We actually want to see if we can implement parts of it in our organization. They offered me a job. So right out of university, I worked for an insurance company for the first few years.
And you learned through that you never wanted to work for a corporate again. Why was that? How soon did that realization come?
Relatively fast. I think there were a few things that I didn't particularly like. I think that the first thing was the organization is so big, right? And I think for some people, they go to work, they do what they need to do, and they leave, and that's basically it. I just couldn't understand that was it. You start at 9, you end at 5, you go home, you make dinner, and then you sleep and you do it over the next day again. I said, there must be more to life. And then the second thing was I guess sort of the same anxiousness that I felt when I was in university. So I went to management and said, okay, how do I get into management? Because I'm not going to be doing this for the rest of my life. I want to fast track to either a director position or even better, the board. And everyone's like, no, there's a process to this. And you have to kind of wait years and then get gray hairs and grow old. And then you kind of get into the position. So I was like, no, that's not for me. They had one specific project, which was pretty cool. They were actually building one of the first internet insurance companies in the Netherlands. So I was able to kind of be part of that program for a few years, but then said, that's it. That's the last thing I'm going to do. And then I left to build my own company.
I mean, when you left, you actually sold your house and your car, right? To start it with two old friends.
Yeah, because I had no savings whatsoever. So
were you worried? I mean, you were selling everything.
Yes, I was relatively concerned. But yeah, I mean, I was, it was relatively easy because didn't have any kids. So, I had a house, had a car. I said, that's material things. If I work hard enough, I can always buy a house at a later age. So that should be fine. But I did want to have a little bit of a kind of smaller cushion in case things go sour with the job. So I decided to sell the house and the car and put that money into the business. So at least, I could pay rent and have a little bit of a salary while I was building the business.
Do you go into it thinking, I'm going to give it a go for 5 years, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to pull out?
No, actually, when we started the company, I had two co-founders. We were thinking of, I'm going to do this like for a very long time. That was the idea. So after 3 years, we kind of gained some success. And then we kind of knew, okay, this is actually going to work. So this should be fine in terms of making it a mature business. We were also very fortunate. We didn't have any outside funding. So everything was funded by ourselves. That made life slightly easier. But then in year 6, we acquired one company and then we got an acquisition offer. I felt a bit exhausted after year 6, year 7. So I decided, if this offer allows me to be bought out as a founder, I'm more than happy to kind of take that offer and focus on other things in life.
So just before you took that offer, the business actually started out as a comparison site, right? And then became a data center, which is totally different. What was that pivot like? How did it come about?
Yeah, the comparison side was the idea of one of my co-founders, because he basically said, Mike, you've built this for the insurance company. We should build this like for everything, like an everything comparison site was his big idea. And he was very, very sales driven. But the moment I spoke with his brother, who was the other co-founder, we noticed that I didn't have any legs. This was in 99, 2000. So this is literally like the start of the dot-com bubble. So it wasn't the best time to start a business to consumer company. But then the one thing I was always driven by was helping organizations out. It came back to the research that I did with IT auditing. So we initially started to do some consulting for SMEs on the IT side. And we noticed that everyone was done with their IT team. They said they're way too expensive. Why can't I like outsource this to someone and do it, have it done for me? And that's how we started our data center. And that was the business that really took off and became a success.
So this was your version of Google Cloud before it became a thing.
Literally, yeah. I wish we would have known this. Would have stuck around a bit longer.
Yeah. So you got bought out. Do you have any plans? What were you going to do that?
Not necessarily, but I like the consulting part of our business. So besides the data center, we did have a lot of strategic IT consulting that we did as well. It helped us pay the bills initially before launching the data center as a service. And I like the consulting part. So I said, for the time being, what I can do is I can just be a consultant on my own. So I just advised like a lot of startup founders that were asking for either fundraising help or help on strategy for their business as they were expanding their company. But in that same year, because I was doing so much advisory work and speaking at events, I was asked by the Dutch Prime Minister and the Secretary of Finance. And they basically said, we're launching an economic development board and we're looking for a vice chairman. Would you be keen to kind of take on that role? And I was like, of course, super honored to be asked. So I rolled into becoming this vice chairman for this board for 4 years. And in the meantime, did some investing and some consulting as well.
It sounds like a tremendous opportunity because you got to work with the top CEOs of the country, right? In Netherlands, like Shell, Unilever, ING. Yeah. What kind of learnings did you gain from that? Anything that stands out?
Yeah, I think looking back, in all fairness, it felt like everything always would fall into place, like from ING to building the company to becoming his advisor and becoming vice chairman. So I think at the start, I was slightly arrogant, like, look at me, they want me for this position. I must be amazing. I learned really fast to humble myself, luckily. So I noticed that all of these people had so much experience. They were entrepreneurs themselves. They've built multinational companies over decades, or they were big CEOs, or they were in government. So the Prime Minister of New Zealand was on the board. Also, they had a separate advisory board with international members. The head of the UN at that time, Ruud Lubbers, was also on the board as well. So it was very impressive to be part of that community. And I noticed that whilst I was getting closer to these people and having more conversations, I was like, oh man, I'm just going to take every opportunity to learn. And I want to listen. I'm just going to sit down and listen and learn as much as I can. So that was an amazing time.
And what were the main things that happened during that period? Because you guys were discussing about how to bring the ecosystem to the next level, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did, we started a young economic development board and allowed for a lot of young, amazing talents in the Netherlands to be part of the board and develop themselves, but also represent a younger generation of up and coming CEOs and people in government, etc. I remember going to a meeting and we met the real estate mogul, and he owned one of the big soccer clubs in the Netherlands. It was a co-owner and he has a super busy schedule. So we get to the meeting and he's sitting there in the room on his own, reading the newspaper. And it's stupid, but it impressed me so much because here's this guy, he's like super busy. He has a meeting with us. He's not only on time, he's early. And he's so early that he had time to kind of read the newspaper. And I was like, how is it possible that someone this busy is able to make time for us? And it always stuck with me. And as we were talking, he basically said, do you know why I'm early to this meeting? I said, I have no idea. I said, you get up early? I don't know. And he's like, no, the moment you are in a position of power, it allows you to control the narrative of a meeting, of a setting, even, in strategizing for your business. He said, I am always one step ahead. It's literally what he said. I make sure that I'm one step ahead in anything that I do. And I was in awe. I was like, this is amazing. This is such a life lesson. And yeah, I've always taken it with me in furthering my career.
So I suppose anyone who wants an investment from you would know, come early to a meeting, no matter what.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, at least definitely try to be on time. It just sets a very different expectation if you present yourself in this way.
I also read that you were doing investments at the time and your first investment lost you lots of money because you had no idea what investing was about. But
yeah, I guess the natural thing for me after the company we had was to give back in multiple ways. And one is being an advisor, and then two is also investing in businesses. I think the biggest thing that I've learned from that time is the moment you invest in industries that you don't have knowledge of or a background in, it becomes very difficult to kind of value the actual business and understanding what does growth look like? I've always been in tech almost all my life. The most natural thing would have been for me to invest in other tech companies. But I said, no, I'm just going to invest in fashion and in LED lighting companies and all kinds of businesses. I just noticed over time that it makes it very difficult to value these companies. And all these entrepreneurs were amazing on their own. If you're in the lighting industry, that industry has its own struggles and its own different ways of doing things, its own little community. It's very hard as an outsider to kind of understand that community if you're not sort of really in it or really understand the business behind it.
Because you're very big about focus, right? For all your founders, you must be very focused. Is this where your obsession with focus started? Because you realized that as you were going to find more investors, they also find it very hard to invest because it was such a random portfolio of companies too.
Yeah, the one thing that I learned after those investments, we were speaking to a large secondary fund that was looking to buy out our entire portfolio. And the biggest question for them was, what is your thesis on the investment landscape, these industries? Why have you picked this company versus this company? So our thesis was we wanted to look at the entrepreneurs behind the businesses. So we were very entrepreneur founder heavy and not so much thesis driven. And then I understood why some of these funds are like hyper focused on either a region or an industry or a certain stage, and really understood that, yeah, focus is so incredibly valuable. And I've always learned this over time. The moment you're able to nail one thing extremely well, it allows you to make more space to do other things. The moment you do like a lot of things at the same time and you haven't mastered one of them, you're never going to create like additional outsized value.
Didn't you have a friend called Steph who told you about this random course at Harvard?
Yeah, it's true. He decided to do an executive course at Harvard. And he literally told me, he said, man, this was such a good experience for me. And you have to fork out a little bit of money, but it's really valuable in terms of the network and just the classes, the content is really good. And this is me sometimes like on a whim. I decided to sign up for one of the courses. And the good thing was that back in the days, the courses were actually in person, not online or virtual. So I spent a little bit of time in Massachusetts, Boston, at the Harvard campus. You're with your class like day in, day out. You start at 6 in the morning or 6:30 in the morning. You have a group breakfast, then you work on a business case, and then the classes start. And then you tend to spend time with the class after class for dinner or drinks after. So it was a really good experience, and it just opened up an entirely new network for me as well.
Were you not tempted to stay back in the States because you end up going to Singapore instead?
Yeah, I wasn't set on where to go next. I think I was thinking about what is going to be the next step in my career. And I did want to join a fund, but hadn't thought about where or kind of which region. This was pure coincidence that 2012, one of my classmates who was in Singapore said, hey, there's actually stuff going on here in Singapore and in the region. You should definitely check it out. On a whim, bought a ticket to Singapore and wanted to understand what is happening here and what does the investment landscape look like.
So you end up speaking with Jeff and Vinny and it solidified your decision to come to Singapore. So it sounds like they really said a lot of things that really hit you. So what were some of the things that really convinced you that this was the place to come to?
So I think I'm very on who's the person behind the idea. And if there's a connection or if it feels good, I'm sort of keen to go all in. And I think it was with Vinny and Jeff similar, where we had a initial talk and that was good. And we talked about what was happening in the ecosystem and how diverse it was and how it's still very early compared to China and India, and how the diversity in the ecosystem allows for a lot of growth over time, but also the risk of trying, because there weren't a lot of funds around. If you look at it now versus 10 years ago, it's entirely different. So it was kind of a big leap of faith. But again, I felt good about the connection with it. Felt like they had their hearts in the right place. So I said, let's give it a go. And then in the first year, I was kind of helping more on the fundraising side. So it allowed me to also get to know them better and for them to get to know me better as well before officially jumping in and working together.
Weren't you thinking after that conversation, how can I be helpful? And then you were helping one of those companies to fundraise. And you found a family friend who wanted to invest with their family office. So all those connections came in.
Yeah, true. So the first thing I always try to do is if I can be of value to a group or a community or an organization, I'll try to do so. It's easy to say I'm amazing at X, Y, and Z, and you don't show it. I try to at least show it first and then just prove myself. So my first question was, where can I be helpful? And they had a few companies that were actually fundraising at that point in time. I had a network of friends and family offices that were looking to invest more into Asia, and they didn't have network or access to Southeast Asia. So it was kind of an ideal timing in that moment.
So I want to step back a little bit. You make it sound as though moving to Singapore was not that hard, but it was quite a big decision. You just had a baby. The conversation with your wife must have been quite hard.
Yeah, it was definitely a rough period because my wife didn't want to move to Singapore just yet. So first of all, she's like, who's Vinny and Jeff? I have no idea who these guys are. And you're betting our entire future on these two folks. Yeah, and we just had Lana, our daughter. She was just one. So I decided initially to fly back and forth between Singapore and the Netherlands, which was not easy because it's a 12-hour flight. And doing that every 2 weeks is pretty intense. But I just believed in the opportunity. I thought something was there. I felt there was more opportunity here than there was back in Europe. So I literally said we should give it a chance and give it a try. Eventually, she understood that flying back and forth wasn't like sustainable over time. So yeah, it's convinced her to give it a try. And yeah, the first few years, it wasn't very smoothly. She didn't like it at all. But yeah, got to build our own community, got our own friends. And yeah, eventually she loved it. And our son is born here, makes it very different. But yeah, it wasn't easy for a few years.
As you said, your role initially was to fundraise for Golden Gate Ventures. You helped to raise over $60 million. And I read that in the early days, you actually felt like an imposter. So how did you figure those first days out and find your footing?
Yeah, it's funny. I still remember when Vinny had a speaking gig in Jakarta for E27. And Vinny said, hey, Mike, maybe, to kind of position yourself, why don't you go to the speaking gig? And I'll say I'll have to pass, and then you can go in my place. And I felt so awkward because I was like, dude, I just got here. like, what am I talking about? And he's like, no, just look at your background. You've been an entrepreneur, you've fundraised, you've invested in companies in a different market, but the experience you have, you can translate that to the founders here. I was like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense. So I just spoke about my experience as a founder, investor, being even in a government related entity as well. So I took that, but it still felt like I'm not from here. Don't have the experience of being an investor here. It feels like everyone around me has every right to be here and I'm not. So that felt a bit awkward. The community was very welcoming. That was helpful. The second thing I would say is that just by doing a lot of speaking, people actually said your experience is interesting because it's different and you are different to any other investors we've spoken with. So that gave me a bit more confidence to not feel like I'm an imposter here.
And what was the experience like trying to get through the door to speaking to Asia? Because it's very family driven, isn't it?
Well, I think, of course, the brand helped. If you can say you're a partner at Golden Gate Ventures, people tend to take a meeting.
Even back then, when you were still very young?
Yeah, I felt like even in the first few years, I think that the team did an amazing job in positioning themselves and marketing the brand. I guess across Asia, it was welcoming. There were instances where I would show up for a meeting and people were surprised, like, who are you again? So that did happen a number of times. But I knew why I was in the meeting and I felt like I have a good story to tell you. We have an amazing opportunity, so you should listen. So I did try to be convincing and very confident in going into those meetings. It wasn't always easy. It wasn't always easy. So sometimes you felt like, oh, I'm not being taken seriously, maybe for a number of reasons. But yeah, you just have to kind of pull through and keep repeating your story and keep knocking on doors.
And you have to keep doing that for years, right? Before they even give you the first paycheck.
Yes. Yeah. We've had LPs that I've spoken with for 2-3 years before they read the first check.
Yeah. I heard that story you shared about a Japanese company that you met for 3 years and
Yeah.
you just met and just talked about life and anything but business.
Yeah, and it was literally just building confidence. And for some of the families as well, like some families even say, yeah, I just want to get to know you better and understand your philosophy and who you are and how you act in life. So it happens that sometimes I go cycling with LPs, sometimes it's playing golf, sometimes it's having a few dinners. I mean, for some of them, I even know their families because you build such a bond over time. And again, it's important for them. If they commit to you for 10 years, life of a fund, which effectively means that they really want to feel there's trust and the relationship there.
And you were also fundraising from different parts of the world, Middle East, Europe, States. There must be very different experience there.
I just got back from Oman where for like a short roadshow. Yeah, it is different. I feel so enriched because you learn all the different customs and cultures and the way they do things. And even from a fundraising perspective, like how different is fundraising in Japan or Korea versus Indonesia or Singapore or the Middle East, like the different customs. In Europe, if I go fundraising, I can be fairly direct because most European countries are direct.
And you're Dutch, so you're directed.
Yeah. So that helps. So yeah, if I'm in Germany or in London, it's a relatively straightforward, easy conversation, or even in France. Yeah, Middle East is a little bit more whining and dining. It's funny, it's literally halfway between Europe and Asia. And even in the way they look at fundraising, it feels similar. Yeah. And here in Asia, although it's different within the countries, but yeah, it's more relationship building than anything else.
You said there was a difference between, say, Japan and Korea. What are the differences like?
I would say that the ones that take the most time would definitely be Japan. It's really about getting through the hierarchy. It's really about building a long-term relationship, having conversations with different parts in the organization. It's very important. Korea is a bit more transactional from a fundraising perspective. I think the larger Korean corporates have an idea of, okay, in our strategy, we want to have allocation in Southeast Asia. So that makes it slightly easier to convince them to invest. So it's slightly more transactional, I would say.
And what about the ecosystem itself? Because when you came, it's very different from what it's like now. What is the shift that you've witnessed in terms of just people looking at startups?
So much has happened in the past 10 years. I'm guessing the maturity of founders, I think that has changed a lot. Almost like if you go back 9-10 years ago, founders almost had to explain themselves why they were building this company. And now it's normal. If my neighbor starts a company, we're like, oh, awesome, good luck to you. And like 9-10 years ago, it was a different conversation. Why would you start a company? Why don't you just get a job at a big firm or something? So that has changed. So it's normalized.
You had to convince your own people as well to invest in Southeast Asia, right? They were asking
Yeah.
the same question. Why?
Yeah, like 9-10 years ago, people were like concerned about political risk. Yeah, look at Indonesia and look at Thailand, and there's so much happening. Don't you feel it's risky? And like we've never had anything even close to political risk when it comes to investing in tech companies. So it's really funny, the perception that people have from the outside looking in. So yeah, you had to convince them, why you're here and why you see this big opportunity. Like now, it's the other way around. People are saying, oh, it's an amazing opportunity. It makes so much sense that you guys invested here. But yeah, it was a long journey. And for founders, it's fairly similar. If you look at the companies that were raising a Series 9 years ago versus companies that are raising a Series A now, it's vastly different. The valuations are way higher. It's easier to get institutional money to back these companies. So yeah, that has changed a lot.
Were you saying that shift came around the 2015, 2016?
It was still fairly early, but what happened in 2015, more funds like ourselves, Open Space, East Ventures, Jungle, Monks Hill, we were all in the market raising either our second or our first proper institutional fund. And that actually led to just more attention on the region. And I'm guessing if you have 7 or 8 fund managers knocking on your door, raising for their fund, those LPs must think, oh, there must be something here. So this can't be a coincidence. So that was a big part of it. And it allowed also the companies behind the funds or in the portfolio of these to raise of these similar institutions. So that was helpful. I think what also happened was 2015, 16 was still a very good year in terms of venture for India. So a lot of investors that were looking at India were also with one eye kind of looking at Southeast Asia. Sequoia India was making investments here. They think they invested in Gojek at the time. So there was some buzz, but if you look at it now versus then, it was still relatively early days.
And then you had the actual exits around 2017, 2018 as well. Yeah. So that people saw there was a real opportunity here.
Yeah, because I think prior to that, the largest exit prior must have been Vicky. I think Vicky was acquired by Rakuten for, I think, 200 million. And that was, of course, a big sensation because it was early days and we didn't have any big exits. I think when Gojek started making acquisitions, I think Grab becoming more acquisitive as well. People were saying, oh yeah, I think this looks like, for instance, what happened in China, where either Baba or Tencent or JD were making acquisitions. So we saw kind of similar trajectories, and those exits were very necessary also to kind of show to the LPs that, hey, we can actually make money with investing in these companies.
I suppose it's a question everyone asks you all the time. As a VC, what were you looking for? I imagine you were looking at the people, the founders in terms of investment. What were you looking for?
It would be 70% people driven because one, the companies are early, of course. There is some comparison because if you look at an e-commerce model or a payments gateway model or like a first mile logistics model, we can compare some metrics to, for instance, China or India and say, hey, there's a bit of a benchmarking that we can do here. Although there's still so many differences in those markets. So that helps. We look for scalability in general. I tell founders all the time, you have to imagine that every single dollar that we invest in your business, it has to return 5, 6, perhaps 10x for us, which means that you need outsized growth over time for us to make this work. So even if you have an amazing business and you're an amazing founder, but it's not scalable, it doesn't make sense for us to invest. So we do look at, is the founding team or are the founders able to create a business that is outsized and not only create it, but also run it as a CEO, because you're a founder initially and you become a CEO over time. And when that happens, your dynamic as a business is different. You have different stakeholders, whether it's business partners, investors, government, if you're regulated, that all changes over time, which means that the founder that you was in year 1, you're going to be a different person in year 6, 7, or 8. So we're kind of looking for, do we think these people have the ability to grow into these roles over time? And then from a business standpoint, I think focus is again important. We like founders that are laser focused on building a business. And it doesn't matter if it's a singular business at first. So if you have like one product, but if you have a product that does amazingly well in those first few years, again, then you'll have room to do other stuff over time. I always get nervous when founders explain to me like 11 different things in one pitch. Because the question is, how can you find time in a day to make 11 amazing businesses at the same time? Which is going to be very, very difficult. So founder personality, ability to scale, ability to execute, and a typical scalable model in itself is what is important to us.
And isn't local knowledge something that you really prioritize as well? Because you really need to know the local market in order to do anything. And especially in places like Indonesia, they are focused on the country first. Whereas in, say, Malaysia, Singapore, you look more out from day one.
Yeah, it's just the reason why I say 95% of our portfolio are founders that have been here for a long time or are local from Indonesian or Vietnamese or Malaysian. And that is crucial for us. We've had a number of companies pitch us and said, I'm from London, but I'm relocating here and building a business here. I was like, that's amazing. But it's also important for us that you understand those little intricacies when you're expanding from Indonesia to Vietnam and understand how vastly different those two countries are. And building a team in Vietnam is entirely different than building a team in Singapore, for example. So all those things are important to us, that people understand what it means to build a business there.